Welcome to Mythological Sleep Stories. Tonight, let yourself drift gently into a world of wonder and timeless quiet, a world where ancient sands whisper stories beneath the stars, and forgotten gods linger in the hush of sleep. You're about to enter the dreamscape of the Egyptian god who forgot how to dream, a calming bedtime story woven with myth, memory, and the stillness of moonlit temples. This is a tale set along the banks of the Nile, where papyrus sways in the midnight breeze and sacred ibis glides silently over silvered waters. In a forgotten sanctuary at the edge of the desert, one of the old gods, once a weaver of dreams and visions, has fallen into silence. He no longer dreams, he no longer remembers how. But tonight, as starlight spills across the temple floor and incense winds through the warm night air, a gentle journey begins. You will walk ancient pathways carved in sandstone, pass beneath weathered archways where golden hieroglyphs shimmer faintly, and sit beside sacred pools reflecting the face of the moon. You will hear lullabies whispered by the wind, and slowly, softly, the forgotten god will remember. And perhaps as he learns to dream again, so will you. You're here now, in a place that is entirely yours, Olde, a sanctuary of sleep and imagination. You've made it through the day, and this time is for you. Let my voice carry you gently into this sacred stillness. Think of me as a guide and friend, leading you to peaceful, ancient spaces where nothing is urgent and everything is calm. There is no need to stay awake to follow every word. You are always free to imagine things differently, to let the story shift and melt into your own dream world. Let go whenever you're ready. Let the story become part of your breath. Before we begin, let's take a few moments to slow down and settle into your body. Take a long, gentle inhale, and as you exhale, imagine warm desert air moving through palm leaves above. Breathe in again, slowly and deeply, and with your out-breath, release any heaviness from the day. The stars are rising, the temple awaits, and time has grown soft and slow. Each breath draws you further from the waking world. Inhale peace, exhale thought. Let yourself arrive fully in this quiet space where the wind carries memories and forgotten gods awaken gently from their slumber. It's time to rest. It's time to dream again. You're about to meet a god who, strangely enough, has forgotten how to dream. It starts in the hush of night, where the Nile flows like liquid moonlight, and the stars burn gently above the temples and tombs. But up in the sacred halls of the Duat, the shadowy realm where the gods of Egypt dwell, one lonely figure sits in silence. You probably won't survive this job, just saying. Dream weaving was never meant to be easy. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. You don't really remember when it started. At first, you were Ra's quiet attendant, neither a war god nor a sunbringer, just one of the lesser gods who worked between the cracks of reality. You weren't given a title in the great temples. Priests didn't chant your name at dawn, but you were essential nonetheless. Your task? To shape the dreams of sleeping mortals. Not the flashy ones filled with gold and fire, but the quiet dreams. A mother kneeling by a riverbank, a fisherman remembering the scent of lotus flowers, a lonely scribe imagining his long-dead brother's voice again. You were the one who crafted those. You'd float through the dream fields like a sand heron over reeds, scooping up little fragments of memory and weaving them into gentle loops. Sometimes, you'd sneak in a soft sound, the rustle of wind through papyrus, or the clinking of beads on a dancer's wrist. That was your signature. But now something has gone wrong. You wake, or whatever the divine version of waking is, and realize you haven't dreamed yourself. Not once, not in weeks, maybe months, maybe longer. The other gods notice. Isis gives you a sympathetic glance. Thoth offers one of his riddles, which, as usual, doesn't help. Bastet suggests sleep under her temple incense. Even Anubis, not exactly the cuddliest deity, tries to cheer you up by letting you listen to the jackal's cry. But nothing works. Your temple, once humming with the soft breath of mortals, feels quiet. The dreaming corridors that once shimmered with light and color now hang empty. Sand gathers in the corners. Maybe you're dreaming and don't know it, whispers Nephthys one night, her voice like smoke. Or maybe you gave them all away. She could be right. You begin to retrace your steps. Not physically, gods don't need to, but internally. You revisit the dreamscapes you built, one by one. There's the little girl who dreamed of flying papyrus boats, the old baker who used to dream of his wife, still alive and making jokes about the price of honey. You gave them peace. You know you did. So why do you feel so hollow? Historians still argue whether the Egyptians truly believed the gods shared their emotions, or simply wore them like masks. If they're right, maybe that's the problem. Maybe you're not supposed to feel lonely, but you do. In your loneliness, you begin to drift farther than usual, beyond the temples and the cities, past the gardens of Luxor and the star-strewn pools of Nubia. You find yourself in forgotten places, old tombs that were never finished, stones that whisper half-remembered prayers. That's where it happens. You meet a boy, just a mortal boy, maybe 10 or 11. He's sleeping on a woven mat near the back of his family's grain store. It's hot. The air smells of date syrup and old linen, but his mind, it's vibrant. He dreams of a boat, one big enough to carry his whole family, and of sailing down the Nile to the edge of the world. In his dream, crocodiles carry lanterns, and stars bow low to whisper stories. You hover nearby, hesitant, and then you feel something, a flicker, just the tiniest spark, like a candle trying to relight in the wind. It's the first dream fragment you've felt inside yourself in a long time. You follow the boy's dream carefully, as if it might break. And there, in that made-up world of glowing fish and impossible music, you see a version of yourself. Not quite accurate, a bit more dramatic perhaps, but it's you. He dreamed you. Not a great sun god, not a king of the underworld, just you, the quiet god of gentle dreams. And somehow, that opens something. You return to your temple, still uncertain, but now you start paying attention. You begin to listen for stories where you are not the author. You find scraps of dreams among beggars and scribes, pearl divers and dancers. Some remember you by name, others only feel your presence, like the scent of blue lotus at dawn. Each one brings a tiny piece of yourself back. You don't dream yet. Not quite, but something is shifting, and it's enough for now. The gods notice your spark returning. Bastet leaves a saucer of milk with crushed lavender by your door. Horus, surprisingly tender, offers you a vision of the horizon over Memphis. Even Set, chaotic, dangerous Set, tells you a joke so absurd it makes you laugh. Your first laugh in 100 years, and laughter, you realize, is close to dreaming, closer than you thought. You return to the boy, night after night, not to interfere, but to observe. He builds worlds out of reeds and fireflies. He asks questions of gods he's never met, and he always makes space for a quiet figure in the background. You begin to collect these moments, not in jars or scrolls, but inside. Slowly, your temple warms again. The dream corridors fill with light. You hum tunes no one taught you. Maybe this is what it means to be remembered, or maybe this is what it means to return. When you next open your eyes, though they're not really eyes in the mortal sense, you find yourself walking through the temple of forgotten names. No one speaks of this place aloud. It lies somewhere between memory and myth, tucked beneath the dunes and the oldest stars. Even most gods have forgotten how to get here. But you remember just barely. You walk alone beneath its cracked stone archways, where carvings have faded to near invisibility. These were once names spoken with reverence, whispered into the wind before dawn offerings. Now, silent, lost to time, but not to you. You press your hand, again, not really a hand, against a crumbling wall. Dust shifts. A glyph flares softly, like the first note of a forgotten song. You whisper the name, a baker priest from Elephantine, who once left dreams of honeyed bread and laughter beneath children's pillows. You remember her now. That's when the dreams begin to return. Not yours, exactly. Echoes, softly tangled threads drifting toward your temple again. Not many, just enough. You gather them gently, like reeds in a basket. The dreams are different than they used to be. Once they were predictable, lost loved ones, familiar rivers, imagined palaces. Now they arrive with stranger shapes. A man who dreams of a pyramid that breathes, a woman who flies across the desert on an ibis's back, her shawl stitched with moonlight. They feel ancient, but new. You don't try to shape them yet. Instead, you sit quietly and watch. Even gods can learn. That's when the wind changes. You feel it before you see it, a shiver in the air, like someone walking across your grave, if you had one. And then the god of sleep arrives. Supdet greets you with a nod, her eyes bright as Sirius in the night sky. You're stirring again, she says. I'm not sure, you answer. You're not dreaming, but you're listening. That's the first step. She offers you something small, a pebble of obsidian shaped like an eye. You left this behind last time you visited the edge. The edge, the boundary between gods and mortals, between dreams and waking, between who you were and who you're becoming. You take the stone, and the dream fragments begin to glow brighter. Supdet watches you a moment longer. The boy still dreams of you, she says softly. He speaks your name, even if he doesn't know it's yours. You close your eyes, feeling the warmth of that name, not your old title, long forgotten, even by temple scribes, but something better. The boy calls you, the listener, and somehow that feels right. You return to the temple of forgotten names one more time before you leave. This time, you do not walk it alone. Others walk beside you. Memories of priests, poets, dreamers, midwives, dancers, carpenters, children, all the ones who whispered strange dreams into the night. And you say their names, each one, quietly, carefully, as if remembering them will stitch the stars back together. The final name on the wall is your own. You don't say it. You simply bow your head and rest your palm against it. A faint hum rises in the air, a lullaby forgotten by mortals, remembered only by the sand. Then you return to your temple. The corridors shimmer again. Shadows sway softly on painted walls. Incense curls like gentle thoughts through the rafters. And in the center of it all, your seat awaits. But you don't sit yet, because now the dreams are coming to you, not to be shaped or changed, but to be heard as they are. Some gods crave worship, some demand fear. You have become the god who listens, and in doing so, the dreaming begins to return, first in fragments, then in full. One night without warning, it happens. You are dreaming again. It is not a grand vision. You dream of a reed basket floating down the Nile. Inside it, a single blue lotus. And when you wake, for the first time in 1,000 years, there are tears in your eyes. Not sorrow, just softness, the kind only a god who forgot how to dream could ever understand. The temple lies silent, as temples often do when no offerings are left, and no sandals brush the polished stone. But tonight, something stirs just beyond the gate. A boy, 10 years old, with hair like river reeds and eyes wide from wonder. He's not supposed to be here, not at this hour, not barefoot, not without a single candle to light his path. And yet he walks as if summoned. The guards are fast asleep, lulled not by magic, but by the desert's embrace. The boy slips past them with ease. He doesn't run. He walks slowly, reverently, a little basket of dreams clutched tightly to his chest. The temple responds. A faint gust whispers through the columns. Dust lifts in curling spirals. Somewhere deep within the walls, the murals begin to hum, just softly, just enough. You watch him, of course. You are not a god of spectacle or thunder, but you are always watching, especially now, when dreams have begun to return like distant relatives arriving after long absence. The boy walks with a purpose. He knows this temple. He's been here before, though never alone. His mother used to carry him on her hip, murmuring prayers to forgotten gods. One of those gods was you. She didn't know your name. No one does anymore. But the boy, he knows your silence, and he honors it. He stops before a cracked statue near the inner chamber. You know the one, a seated figure with an unreadable face and hands outstretched as if always waiting. Once priests believed that statue whispered back at midnight. No one heard it in generations, except perhaps this boy. He sets down his basket. Inside, a folded scrap of linen, 2 date cakes, a single blue scarab carved from wax. Offerings, yes, but not to bribe or bargain. To remember, he sits cross-legged on the floor, facing the statue. I know you don't talk much, he says, but I brought you something anyway. He pulls a small reed flute from his belt and begins to play. Not a proper song, just a handful of notes, rising and falling like the breeze. The song is wrong, by every rule of temple music, off-key, improvised. And yet, something about it touches the walls. They seem to lean in, just slightly. You listen, and for a moment, you remember something you'd long forgotten. Lullabies. Not the ones sung by mothers to babes, but those offered by stars to newborn gods. Melodies too ancient for language, too soft for thunder. The boy stops playing. I had a dream, he says, about a god who lost his dreams. His voice is clear, unaffected by fear or shame. Children speak like that, don't they? They haven't yet learned to hide their awe behind logic. I think it was you, he continues. You were walking through the sky, but you couldn't sleep. You looked so tired. He doesn't expect an answer, but he gets one. A soft breath of wind curls around his face. It smells of cedar and thyme. The statue's hands glow faintly, not bright enough for fright, just a glow like embers. He smiles. I thought so. He doesn't tell anyone what happened that night. Not his mother, not the priests, not the market women who sell dreams in jars made of glass and hope. But he comes back the next night, and the next, and the next, always barefoot, always carrying a basket of small dreams. And every time, he speaks a little more, tells you of his life, his father who makes sandals but dreams of stargazing, his sister who builds pyramids from mud in the courtyard, the dreams he keeps having about birds that swim and fish that fly. You listen. You remember how to listen. One night, he falls asleep before your statue. You do not wake him. Instead, you gather the dreams curling around his sleeping mind and store them in the folds of the temple's shadow. You place one beneath the statue's hand, where it pulses like a tiny heartbeat. In his dream, he visits you, not as a god, but as a friend. The two of you sit by the Nile, feet in the water, counting boats that sail on starlight. You say nothing, but your silence is warmer than any words he's heard. When he wakes, he doesn't question it. He simply nods as if to say, I'll be back tomorrow. And he is. Others begin to notice. Not the grown-ups, not at first, but the cats, the desert foxes, the drowsy ibis that nest on temple roofs. They come during the boy's visits, lingering longer than usual, curling near doorways and arches, drawn by something returning to life. The temple breathes again, and you, once only the listener, begin to hum softly through its stones. Priests begin to dream again, without knowing why. The baker wakes one morning with a recipe she swears was given to her in sleep. something with cinnamon and fig, shaped like a star. A scribe begins doodling poems in the margins of scrolls, gentle ones about laughter and moonlight and rivers that sing. Your name isn't spoken, but your presence is felt. Then one night, the boy doesn't come, nor the next, nor the one after that. You wait, you listen, but there is only silence. The ibis leaves, the foxes slink away, the dreams grow thin again, like parchment left in the sun. You feel something close to grief, but you do not stop listening. On the seventh night, he returns, limping, bandaged, a bruise on his cheek like the mark of a storm cloud. He says nothing at first, just sits before your statue, places his basket, empty this time, and breathes. I fell, he says. You know this is only half true. You let him sit in silence. Finally, he looks up. Do gods ever feel scared? And for the first time in many ages you speak, not in words, in wind. It wraps around him like a shawl, rustling gently through his hair. Not a yes, not a no, just an answer. His eyes fill with tears, but he doesn't cry. He lays down beside the basket, curls up like a dream unspoken, and falls asleep. You watch over him the entire night. In his dream you walk beside him. No statues, no temples, just two figures on the sand, and a single reed flute playing a lullaby that no one remembers except you. When dawn arrives, he wakes and leaves the temple for the last time. He does not turn back, but before he vanishes into the morning light, he speaks, "Thank you for listening." And though the wind carries his words away, you remember, and for the first time in an age, you begin to dream again. The dream does not end when the boy leaves. It lingers, faint as sandalwood smoke, soft as linen fluttering on a line. The memory of his presence remains in your temple, though his footsteps no longer echo across the marble floor. The warmth of his voice curls like a sleeping cat around the statue's base, and from that warmth, something ancient begins to stir. At first, it's nothing more than a shimmer in the air, barely noticeable, even to you. But over the next few nights, the shimmer takes shape. Wings, a slender neck, feathers that seem woven from the dusk between stars. An ibis, but not like the others. This one glows faintly, as though it carries the shimmer of constellations across its feathers. Its crown gleams with 5 small stars, soft blue, not blinding, just enough to mark it as otherworldly. It walks the corridors with the confidence of one who remembers a time before silence. It finds your statue, bows its head, and then very gently begins to clean the dust from your feet with its beak. You do not speak, but you see, you remember. This is no ordinary bird. This is Thua, once your companion, long forgotten by myth and man, a creature born from dream light and temple incense, entrusted long ago to carry your messages between worlds until the world stopped listening. She is here again, called by something deeper than memory. When she finishes tending to your statue, she hops to the edge of the offering table and rests. Her eyes, like 2 tiny moons, remain open even as her body grows still. And then she dreams. You watch her dream. Yes, even animals can dream in your presence now, and the images she sends are strange and wonderful. The boy, he is older in her dream, maybe 12. His hair is longer, and he wears a necklace of carved wood shaped like stars. He walks among others in a village by the reeds, telling stories, but he speaks your name, not the one written in stone, but the one he whispered in sleep, a name made of soundless comfort, a name only the dreaming would understand. Thua lifts her wings and flies, not far, not yet, but high enough to see the Nile's winding path. The sky is a canvas of indigo and rust, the stars just beginning to blink open their eyes. She follows the river like a ribbon through darkness. Down below, people move through their evening rituals. A potter sings softly as she shapes clay. A young shepherd hums a lullaby to his sheep, A weaver falls asleep with thread still in hand, dreaming of golden feathers. You feel it, dreams gentle flickering, like fireflies beginning to return to the field. Thua does not speak, of course. She is a bird, and words were never her way. But in every wing beat, she brings back fragments of dreams the world had almost forgotten. When she returns, she lays a single feather at the base of your statue. It sparkles like starlight caught in a drop of oil, a gift and a promise. From that night forward, the temple changes. It begins subtly. A priest, long past the age of faith, dreams of a child asking him what his god's favorite color is. He wakes crying, though he doesn't know why. A mason working on a broken pillar begins humming a melody he swears he's never heard, but which fills him with warmth. A merchant passing by the gates pauses for no reason, then whispers a prayer he hasn't said since childhood. And then the cats return, dozens of them. They lounge on the steps, purring loudly, curling around pillars and dozing in sunbeams. Their eyes glow faintly at dusk. The ibis walks among them like a queen inspecting her subjects, and the villagers begin to notice. They speak of a strange peace that seems to wrap around the temple like a blanket. Children report dreams of a god who listens without judgment, who turns nightmares into birds and sets them free into the sky. One girl swears she saw the stars blink in a pattern, 3 long, 2 short, the very night she dreamed of walking through a desert with the god of silence holding her hand. A boy dreams of music, not made by instruments, but by stones that sing and rivers that speak. Your temple hums with life, and Thua is always there, sometimes sleeping on the statue's shoulder, sometimes pecking at papyrus scrolls as if to help scribes find the right words, sometimes flying out across the river, gathering more fragments of forgotten dreams. One day, she brings back a necklace. It's the same wooden necklace the boy wore in her earlier dream. But now, it is real. She lays it at the altar. You know what this means. He is close. He is remembering. That night, the wind changes. It blows from the south, where the sands are golden and the city's ancient. The stars blink faster. The ibis stands alert. Even the cats lift their heads. And then, at the edge of the temple courtyard, he appears. Older, taller, thinner, but unmistakably the boy who once whispered to statues. He walks slower now, not out of fear, but reverence. His eyes scan the walls, now repainted with faint murals. He touches the stone as one might touch the shoulder of a dear friend. When he reaches the statue, he stops. The ibis caws softly and hops to his arm. He smiles. "Hello again," he says. Then he sits cross-legged before you, just as he used to. "I kept dreaming of you," he says, "even when I didn't want to." You listen. "I tried to forget. I thought I had, but I kept waking up, and I missed you." He opens his satchel. Inside, a scroll, a small flute, and a single white feather, one of Thawa's. "I don't know if I'm here to worship you," he admits, "but I am here to remember." He places the scroll before your statue. "I wrote down everything I dreamed, every time I thought you spoke, every time I saw the ibis, every story I made up so I wouldn't forget." He places the feather next to it. "And this is for you, in case you ever forget how to dream again." You do not speak, but the wind does. It circles him softly, like a parent's arm, like a lullaby remembered. He leans back against your statue and closes his eyes. This time, when he dreams, he does not walk beside you. He flies, not as a boy, but as something brighter, something vast. His laughter echoes across the stars. The ibis follows. The river sings beneath. And you finally dream again, not of temples or statues, but of open skies, endless stories, and a world where silence is never empty, just waiting to be heard. The first time the river called to you, it came in a whisper like silk sliding across linen. You were wide awake, seated on the polished marble floor of your temple, listening to the soft breath of the world outside. The Nile's waves pulling at sand and memories seeped through the temple walls as if no stone had been cracked in centuries. Some nights the river would flow soundlessly. Tonight, however, it sang. Under a sky strewn with dew-kissed stars, you stepped from the dim-lit hallway out into the courtyard. The air was warm, but carried the tang of fresh water. The ibis, Thua, was already there, perched elegantly on the curved lip of the granite basin that once held offerings of lotus petals. She dipped one slender foot into the water. The surface rippled, lighting up in brief pulses. You stood beside her, shoulder to shoulder, god and ibis, listening. Further down, the boy, now older, nearing his teenage years, moved like a reed in the breeze. He approached without sound, almost unseen. He wore his wooden star necklace. The rest of his scrap paper dreams rolled in a bundle at his hip. When he reached you, he paused and looked at the river. It glowed in the starlight, resembling a ribbon of fine glass laid upon the earth. I heard it too, he whispered. Yes, you responded, though the word wasn't a sound, but a feeling, felt deep in bone and breath. He kneeled beside Thua, watching the water swirl around her feet. It's singing, he said, or remembering. His voice quivered like a reed shaken by a gentle wind. You remembered first. You remembered the river's true name, a name older than words. It wasn't just Nile, but something wrapped in moonlight and star song, a name spoken only in dreams and carried away by migrating birds. When the boy spoke, you managed to place the syllables one by one in his mind. Kai Reth. He repeated it softly. Kai Reth, the river's heart name, and the water seemed to pulse. The wind shifted, a breeze rustled Thua's feathers. The sandstone walls took on a soft luminescence, as if the river's light bathed them in memory. A dream fragment rushed in, faster than thought. A fisherman's wife stroking her husband's arm in sleep. A student scribbling math problems on papyrus, then sleeping with the residue of ink still on her fingers. Farmers rising in dawn mists, donning sandals to chase their goats upstream. You felt your heart, something you didn't realize a god could have swelled. You stepped forward. The boy gasped when your foot hit the water's edge. Not in fear, in wonder. Gods are supposed to stay on pedestals, but here, standing in river water, you seemed more alive than ever. Thua spoke then, not with words, but a gentle nudge. She hopped close to the boy, knocking the star necklace so it clattered like a distant chime across stone. He reached to pick it up. And me, he asked, do I belong in this river? You responded with a memory, just a crumb. He once dreamed of pushing a basket into the current, letting the dreams inside float gently away, to be found by future generations. Perhaps this night was meant for that. He dipped his hand into the Nile, a ripple, and then another. Along the riverbank, lotus flowers opened their petals, humming softly like awakened children. This river carries dreams, you said inside his head, not a lecturing god, but a voice warmed by presence. Night dreams, lost dreams, future dreams too. Each one ripples outward and comes back. He swallowed and let out a worn breath. Even mine? You answered with the memory of his dream song, played on the boy's flute when he still called himself a child. Notes that bent the river's edge, footnotes in the order of sand and stars. He laughed softly, half afraid, half relieved. Then I belong, he whispered. Together you moved up the riverbank. The stars above seemed to lean closer, as though eager to listen. The water shimmered with Kabirez's true name, reminding you that even the grandest gods can be humbled by a boy and a bird. You guided him to a narrow stone pier. With his basket in hand, he knelt and released the pig's bladder jar that held tiny paper fish, his childhood dreams, one by one. Each one floated outward. carried by the current like paper lanterns on a festival night. You watched each dream drift beneath Thua's watchful gaze, one sword higher, spinning in the water only to sink and surface again. A dream of a mother's voice, a dream about the scent of honey, a dream about the sound of distant laughter. You carried them within yourself gently, each one wrapped around your heart, tied with a ribbon of moonlight. The boy released his last paper fish. He watched it vanish into the river's embrace. Now, he said softly, I carry your dreams too. A soft breeze blew from the water, drowsing him with its lullaby. He closed his eyes. He rested his head on the pier's worn stone. So you did. The temples of your mind expanded, corridors glowing with river images and starlit dreams. Somewhere incense curled, somewhere the sound of bells overhead. A stray temple cat, perhaps, jingled with laughter. You drifted with him, across the river, across centuries, across the fine division between mortal and divine sleep. When dawn came, you woke together. The river still sang. Thua lay between you, as quiet and regal as ever. The boy opened his eyes. He touched your hand. Thank you, he whispered. You felt every word, not in your lungs, but in your soul. You're not sure who led who home. Perhaps neither of you needed guidance anymore. You left the temple together. The rising sun cast long golden shafts across the courtyard. The river's surface gleamed with purpose, and behind you, carved into the stone in flickering shadow, you sensed words. Not the boy's words, not a decree or a command, just a phrase and a memory too old to remember. Dream on. The river flows still. Each night, it remembers more. You are learning to be a god who can dream again. The moon was round that night, swollen like a sacred drum hung in the sky. Its silver light softened the edges of every statue, made the pillars glow like the bones of sleeping giants. All around the temple and along the Nile's edge, preparations had begun for the ancient ritual once known as the Festival of Silent Lanterns. You did not remember it clearly, but the boy did. He woke you before dusk, gently tapping your shoulder as you sat on the great sandstone step that overlooked the eastern riverbank. A subtle breeze tugged at your linen robe, as if even the wind was urging you onward. Do you see them? He asked. You followed his gaze. At first, it was just a flicker, one small lantern bobbing gently on the water, then another, and another, and another. Each carried on a handmade raft of reeds, floating down the Nile like luminous beetles on a journey to somewhere beyond memory. They used to do this for you, the boy whispered. For me, he nodded, to help you find the dreams you lost, or maybe to remind you of the ones still waiting. You hadn't known, or perhaps you had, and it had simply drifted away like so much of your old self, eroded by centuries of silence and stillness. Thua fluttered to your shoulder. The ibis had grown unusually quiet these past days, more watchful than ever. She turned her head and nuzzled your cheek, as if to say, yes, this is important. The boy had prepared for this night. In the courtyard, he had spent all morning carefully weaving reed mats, tying them with bits of papyrus string. Upon each mat, he had placed a single lantern, small clay bowls, each with a floating wick and a splash of scented oil. A few of them were decorated with charcoal sketches of stars, eyes, or birds. On one, he had drawn a shape that looked almost like your own face, though softened with a sleepy, wistful smile. He lit the first one himself. As the flame took life, it cast a golden halo across his cheeks. The light flickered in his wide eyes, eyes filled with wonder and something like hope. He placed the lantern gently into the river, where it caught the current and began its silent voyage downstream. They say, he began as he prepared the second one, that if your dream reaches the river's heart before sunrise, it will be answered. You said nothing, but sat beside him, helping him steady the next raft. Together, you lit it and let it go. Lantern after lantern, the two of you sent your dreams down the Nile. Some were his, childlike and earnest. Some were yours, tentative and abstract. One of them bore no mark at all, yet you knew it contained a dream too deep to name. Perhaps it was the dream of remembering how to love, or how to laugh, or perhaps it was simply a dream of sleeping without stone in your bones. The villagers returned that night, drawn not by divine command or festival decree, but by intuition. They came quietly, their feet wrapped in cloth, their torches dimmed. They stood along the edges of the water in silence, watching the river glow. A child broke from the crowd and ran to you with a candle in hand. She looked up, her smile missing a tooth, her fingers smudged with ash. For you, she said. You bent, took the candle, and nodded solemnly. Your first blessing in an age was not a command or miracle. It was acceptance, a whisper. Yes, let it float. The lanterns multiplied. The river carried them like stars fallen from the sky, too gentle to burn. Reflection danced on the undersides of the bridges. Even the stone lions at the gates seemed less fierce that night, as if soothed by the sight. The boy stood beside you, breathing in the warm, spiced air. We used to be afraid of you, he said. Not anymore. You felt no shame in that. You only nodded. Fear was never what you had wanted. Reverence, perhaps, but this quiet unity, it was something older and more sacred than all the temple scripts combined. A dream came to you then, not a memory, but a new dream, one that wasn't carved into walls or passed down in hymns. In the dream, the river spoke in many voices. Some sounded like reeds rustling in the wind, others like giggling children. One sounded like thunder, another like a mother's lullaby, but all of them said the same thing: you are not forgotten. You turned to the boy. Do you hear it? He looked at you, a little surprised. Hear what? The river, you said softly. She's singing. The boy tilted his head, listening. After a long moment, he nodded. I think I do. You stood together until your legs ached, until the last of the lanterns vanished beyond the curve of the Nile, until the villagers slowly, silently began to leave, some whispering prayers, others weeping gently without knowing why. And in the quiet that followed, the river shimmered. You turned back toward your temple, but before entering, you paused and looked over your shoulder. The Nile flowed like time itself, carrying light and dreams and memory alike. And for the first time in an eternity, you felt full, not of power, but of peace. The morning after the festival of silent lanterns dawned soft and golden, the sky painted in watercolor blues and oranges. A hush still hung over the temple grounds, as if the earth itself was reluctant to disturb the sacred silence of the night before. You sat once more in the shadow of the colonnade, watching the Nile. No lanterns remained on its surface now, only ripples and drifting petals from the garlands some villagers had tossed into the water. Three had dozed near your feet, feathers puffed slightly in the warmth. The boy was gone for the moment, off to gather more honeyed bread, or perhaps to chase lizards in the sand. But in his absence, something else had returned, an ancient pull within your bones, a soft hum just beneath your skin. The temple was calling you, not the temple you now walked through daily, cleaned and polished and brightened by sunlight. No, this was the deeper one, the one beneath it all, the temple of forgotten names. You had almost let it slip from memory, as so many gods had, but now that the dream song of the river had reached you, it stirred the ancient corridors below the stone floors, beneath the sandstone altars, a buried chamber, a locked door, a place where things that had been sacred were stored when no longer spoken of. You remembered now, the staircase, hidden behind a false wall in the western shrine, just behind the statue of a wingless falcon. It had once been guarded by high priests, its entrance swept clean with reeds dipped in perfume and blessed by lunar oil. Now it was dusty, forgotten even by those who kept the temple's upper halls. but not by you. You stood slowly, muscles stiff from disuse. The steps came back to you as if you'd walked them only yesterday, past the mosaic of the dreaming crocodile, beneath the carved ceiling that depicted the night sky as it once was, before the stars had names. You found the seam of the hidden door with your fingertips. The stone was cool, heavy. You pressed it with your palm in the old pattern, two slow, one fast, then a final lingering push at the center. It opened with a sigh. The air that greeted you was still and dry, tinged with the faint perfume of myrrh and forgotten paper. As you descended, the light faded, but your eyes adjusted, not as a human's would, but as a god's should. The walls were covered in names, not scratched haphazardly, but painted in careful rows and sacred spirals. Each name glowed faintly, imbued with remnants of worship, long-faded names of villagers and priests, of strangers and songwriters, of gods lesser known and deities who had faded without even a whisper of farewell. Your own name was there too, not the one the boy called you, not the one spoken by stone lips and statues, but your true name, the one given to you before pyramids, before papyrus, before even language itself. You reached out and touched it. It pulsed gently beneath your fingers, as if greeting you after a long slumber, and suddenly, like a rush of desert wind, you remembered. You remembered the first time someone had spoken that name in prayer. It had been a lonely woman in a distant village, cradling a child who could not sleep. She had whispered your name as a plea, asking not for miracles, but for dreams, a single small dream to calm the child's tears. You had heard her. You had sent the breeze that night, the sound of reeds, the image of stars drifting behind the child's eyelids. You had sent sleep, and she had thanked you. Now, standing in the buried hall, you felt her echo, the warmth of it. Name after name surrounded you, some curling like vines, others etched in boxy, forgotten scripts. You walked among them slowly, hands brushing against ancient syllables. Nemet Het, goddess of late-hour tears. Senkhotep, a fisherman whose dreams became poems. Tianu, guardian of the western fig tree, names the world had let go of, but names you had not. Some glowed brightly, as if still remembered by a few. Others were dim, on the edge of vanishing. You paused before one especially faint name. You couldn't pronounce it anymore, even as a god. It was a name without vowels, carved by a people who vanished before the first pyramids were dreamt of. You knelt and pressed your forehead to the stone. Sleep well, you whispered. Thua had followed you quietly. She cooed softly, hopping between your feet and the base of the wall. She too had names here, many. Ibis of the sand, feather that waits, left wing of dusk. You stroked her head gently. I forgot them all, you said aloud, even mine. The hall did not answer, but it held you in its memory. You, who had forgotten, were still remembered here. As you wandered deeper into the chamber, you found a niche carved into the far wall, an offering shelf. It held cracked bowls of dried figs, a clay figure missing an arm, a tiny necklace made of shells, all tributes once left by hands now dust. You added something of your own. Around your neck you wore a small amulet the boy had given you. It was crude, shaped from river stone, painted with red ochre in a pattern he insisted was very lucky. You placed it on the shelf beside the clay figure, a living offering, proof that the world still remembered, even if it didn't know the words. Then, in the deepest part of the chamber, you found the mirror. It was not a mirror of glass, but a pool, a perfect circle of still water, fed by an underground spring. Once, high priestesses had gazed into it to see visions. Now it reflected only you, or so you thought. As you peered into it, the ripples changed. You saw yourself as you had been, tall, luminous, crowned with a halo of nightbirds, eyes like eclipses. Then the image shifted. You saw the boy, asleep beneath the fig tree, clutching your reed-woven blanket. You saw the villagers from the night before, whispering your name without realizing it was yours. You saw every lantern still drifting downstream, their light flickering even miles away. Then you saw a dream, not a memory, but a gift. It was a temple, not made of stone, but of woven stories. A place where forgotten gods and names were gathered, not to be worshipped, but to be rested. A dream where every name ever spoken would one day be remembered. You dipped your fingers into the water. I remember now, you whispered, and the chamber echoed the words back to you. You climbed the stairs again slowly, with reverence. The hidden door closed behind you, sealing the names once more, but this time not in darkness, in protection. Back in the sunlit courtyard, the boy was waiting with a fig in each hand. "Where'd you go?" he asked. "To remember something important," you replied, taking a fig and biting into its warm, honeyed flesh. The boy grinned. "Did you find it?" You smiled, juice dripping down your fingers. "Yes," you said, "and I think I'm starting to dream again." Night returned to the temple in the usual hush, ushered in by a cooling breeze that rustled the papyrus and ruffled Thua's feathers as she perched beside you. The boy had long since fallen asleep, curled under your blanket beside a shallow bowl of dates he'd only half finished. In the hours since you visited the Temple of Forgotten Names, you had barely spoken, not out of sorrow nor fear, but out of something deeper, something sacred. Memory stirred in you now, like the Nile's hidden current. You sat with your back to the fig tree, hands clasped loosely around your knees, staring out at the star-heavy sky. And then, as if stirred by ancient rhythm, you rose. There was a place near the edge of the temple grounds where no priests ventured anymore, where broken columns lay in crooked lines like toppled game pieces, and the wind sang through hollow chambers as though it remembered something the rest of the world did not. This was where the boat had always been. You hadn't seen it in countless centuries, yet somehow your feet moved without hesitation, your steps tracing forgotten pathways through fallen stone and thorny brush. Thua followed silently, and there, nestled between two fractured walls where wild myrtle had begun to grow, you found it. The boat made of feather and string. It wasn't large, barely the size of a fisherman's skiff, but it shimmered faintly in the moonlight, as though it had been spun from dream silk and bird bones. Its hull was a frame of reeds bound together by twine that hummed with ancient lullabies. Its sails were feathers, not stiff and bristling, but soft and downy, collected only from birds who had flown there last. It smelled faintly of cedar, lavender, and something older still, perhaps the breath of the first sleeping god. You placed your hand on its side. The boat did not creak or shift. It welcomed you. Thua hopped aboard first and sat in the bow with a regal air. You climbed in behind her and lowered yourself onto the floor of the vessel, which adjusted to your weight like a hammock that had been waiting all this time. There were no oars. There didn't need to be. The boat moved on its own, drifting forward slowly, though there was no water, only stone beneath you. Yet somehow, impossibly, the boat glided as though guided by a current invisible to mortal eyes. It passed through the last broken archway and slipped between two fig trees, and suddenly you were not in the temple grounds anymore. You were somewhere in between. The boat of feather and string carried you into a dream space, one that shimmered at the edges and smelled of rain and old paper. Above you, the stars blinked, not in constellations, but in names. Each star was a name remembered by a child, each constellation a prayer whispered in half-sleep, and the river, there was now a river beneath you. The Nile, perhaps, but not the Nile you had known. This was a silver river, braided with mist, and echoing with the softest notes of songs long forgotten. You drifted silently, watching the reeds sway along the banks in slow, deliberate rhythm, and on the banks they stood, the forgotten gods, some tall, cloaked in stars, some small, with luminous eyes and smiles like crescent moons. They did not speak, but nodded as you passed, placing their hands over their hearts. Each one, a memory wrapped in shape, a dream once dreamt and now waiting. You recognized some of them, the god of cracked mirrors and shallow wells, the goddess of sand-drift lullabies, the weaver of temple winds. Each had been worshipped once, some only by a single person, a child or a shepherd, but it had been enough to give them form, enough to give them purpose. Now they stood watching your boat pass, and some placed offerings at the river's edge, folded leaves, small stones, feathers tied with red string. One tossed petals into the current, and as they touched the water, you remembered a night long ago when someone had sung your name as a blessing over a cradle. The boat carried you further still, deeper into the heart of the dreaming world. Ahead, a great tree rose from the water itself. It had no trunk, only branches, each one curved like a shepherd's staff or a spiral of smoke, and on every branch perched a bird. Not living birds, but dream birds, composed of whispered hopes and flickers of thought. Some were made of starlight, others of paper. One appeared to be woven from hair and old lullabies. You knew this tree. It was the tree of dreaming things, a sacred place you had not visited since the first human had spoken in their sleep. You disembarked. The boat touched the water's edge softly, and you stepped out into the shallows. The sand beneath your feet was warm and soft, like velvet, and when you looked up at the tree, one of the dream birds unfurled its wings and flew toward you. It circled you once, then landed on your shoulder. It was made entirely of breath, and when it spoke, it sounded like a mother sighing in relief. "We've missed you," it said. "I've missed me too," you replied, and for a moment your chest ached with something like joy, or the closest thing to joy a forgotten god can still feel. The bird leaned close, its beak almost touching your ear. "They dream still, even if they don't know your name." "I know," you said, "but I forgot how to listen." "Then listen now." The bird took off and flew back to the tree, and suddenly the branches rustled, not with wind, but with sound, with the dreams of 1,000 sleepers. You stood beneath the canopy, listening, a girl in a riverside hut, dreaming of a palace made of glass and stars, a farmer dreaming of rain, an old woman dreaming of her husband's laughter, a merchant dreaming of forgiveness. So many dreams, layered and lilting, looping through time and silence like an eternal lullaby. You felt yourself lifted, not by wings, but by meaning. The dreams filled you, poured into the hollows of your memory, like honey into cracked stone. You remembered who you were. You remembered why you had been born from starlight and silence. You were the god of forgotten dreams, the god who had once walked through the dreams of mortals and left flowers in his footprints, the god who could carry sorrow away in silence, who could turn longing into peace. You had not been abandoned, you had merely slept, but now you were awake. Thua let out a soft trill, and you turned. The boat waited for you still, its feathers catching the starlight. It was time to return, but before you stepped aboard, you reached up into the tree and touched one of the birds, one made of gold thread and jasmine petals. It shivered beneath your fingers, then blinked into your palm. A gift. You placed it gently inside your chest where your heart should be. Now it would beat again. Now you would dream again. You climbed aboard the boat made of feather and string, and it drifted away from the tree, away from the river of ancient names, back toward the threshold between dream and waking. And as the boat glided silently through the night, you whispered to yourself, not in words, but in memory, "I remember," and the river answered, "So do we." You awoke just before dawn, cradled in the quiet hush between stars and sunrise. The boy still slept beside you, arms tucked beneath his head, the faintest smile on his lips. The fig trees swayed in the morning breeze. Thutha sat silently on the edge of the platform, watching the horizon like a sentinel, and overhead, the sky was different. It shimmered faintly, not with clouds or stars, but with something softer, more intimate, as if the heavens themselves had been drawn upon with delicate ink and invisible hands. Names hung in the air like threads of gold. Some drifted slowly, as though suspended in water. Others flashed for only a heartbeat, vanishing before you could read them. You stood, brushing dust from your robe, heart full with what had been restored the night before. The boat of feather and string was gone, and yet a feather remained on the ground where it had rested, a silver one, etched with script too old for tongues. You picked it up and held it close. You had dreamed again, and now the world dreamed with you. As you stepped into the first breath of sunlight, the names in the sky shifted. Some grew brighter as you looked at them. One name in particular lingered, hovering just above the boy. You watched it move slowly, in a slow arc across the sky, almost protective. It was his name, not the one he answered to while awake, the one his family used. No, this was his true name, the one whispered when he was born by a mother too tired to speak aloud, the one she had dreamed before he even came into her life. It was written in soft lines and golden light, the kind that only gods can read. You smiled, the sky remembered, and now so did you. It was then you heard it, a subtle crack in the silence. From within the temple behind you, something had shifted, not a sound of destruction, but of release, like a breath held too long, finally let go. You turned and stepped into the threshold of the sanctuary. The great door, once shut tight with spell and neglect, now stood ajar. Inside, it was darker than the sky, but warmer. The inner walls shimmered faintly with reflected memory, the columns alive with the movement of old dreams returning. You walked quietly past faded murals. Some you had painted yourself, in a different age, and there, in the center of the chamber, the statue of you now stood whole. The cracks had healed, the missing eye had returned, the surface glowed faintly, like wet stone kissed by sunrise. A hush filled the air. You reached out your hand and touched the statue's chest, your chest. For a moment, nothing moved. Then, the statue breathed, a single inhale, long and slow, then silence again, and then movement. From every corner of the temple, tiny motes of light drifted upward, some glowing amber, others flickering like candle flames. They swirled toward the open oculus at the top of the dome. You watched them rise and realized they were names, forgotten names, dreamed names, names never spoken aloud, but still carried in someone's heart. They floated up like sparks from a sacred fire, rising into the morning sky. You stepped out once more onto the platform where Thua waited. The boy was stirring now, his eyes fluttering open as the light touched his face. "Did we sleep here all night?" he murmured. You smiled. "We did." He sat up, rubbing his eyes. "I had the strangest dream. You were in it, and Thua, and there was a boat made of feathers, and stars that said people's names. You said nothing. You only watched the sky, where the final motes of name light were vanishing into the blue. I think I saw my mother," the boy added softly. You turned. "Did she speak to you?" He nodded. She didn't use words, though, just smiled. And then there was music, like wind through reeds. You placed a hand on his shoulder. "That means she remembers you." The boy's eyes filled with tears, but he smiled, not out of sadness. This was something more whole, more settled. "Do you think," he whispered, "that gods dream too?" You looked to the sky once more. "I forgot how," you said, "but yes, we do." He grinned. "Good." You knelt and handed him the silver feather. "Keep this. It will help you remember when the waking world becomes too loud." He took it with reverence, like a priest accepting an offering. "What will you do now?" You rose slowly. "I have to walk again," you said. "Among the sleeping and the waking, there are more dreams waiting, more names that have been lost. I must gather them." Thua let out a quiet cry and took flight, circling once above you before landing again. The boy stood, now taller than before, or perhaps just more awake. Will I see you again? He asked. You looked at him closely. His true name still shimmered faintly above him. Only in dreams, you said, but I will be there. He nodded, and then slowly he turned and walked down the temple steps, past the statues, past the columns, and into the waking world. He did not look back, and neither did you. You turned toward the horizon. The sun now hung low over the Nile, its gold dusted across the water like spilled treasure. In the distance, boats creaked, children laughed, and farmers sang to the earth. And above it all, barely visible, names moved across the sky like sails on the wind. You stepped down from the platform. Your bare feet touched warm stone. You did not walk like a forgotten god. You walked like one who had remembered everything. The road from the temple curled like a slow-moving river, winding through fields of flax and papyrus. The morning had settled into that golden stillness known only to Egypt, when the shadows are long but gentle, and everything seems to pause and listen to the sun. You walked with no urgency, each step a quiet meditation. Thua fluttered beside you, wings catching the light in flashes of amber and ochre. Around you the world stirred awake, though softly, as if it too had dreamed something sacred and was not yet ready to speak. Before long, the road led you to the edge of a small village where a market was beginning to bloom. There were no stone gates, no guards, no loud announcements, just the soft clatter of jars being opened, linen canopies being drawn up with creaking ropes, the smell of warm dates and cooled water poured into shallow clay bowls. It was a market not for power or wealth, but for remembering. You had been here once, long ago, not as a god, but as something else, a shadow in a dream, a whisper of thought. The market had changed little since then. There were stalls of beads made from river-washed shells, baskets of ochre dust and crushed lapis, fragments of old songs sold like charms. But it was the weighing stalls that you came for. At the very center of the market stood a low, circular platform made of alabaster, etched with soft spirals. Upon it sat a woman in robes dyed the color of ash and lavender. Her hair was braided with fine cords of copper. Around her were scattered dozens of small, curious items, feather scales, bowls made of glass so thin it trembled in the breeze, and papyrus slips filled with symbols too small to read. This was the wearer of dreams. She looked up as you approached. I know your face, she said, and I know I should not. You bowed your head. I am only here to remember and to listen. Her eyes narrowed in gentle curiosity. It is not often that the forgotten return with their names intact. You said nothing. Instead, you reached into the folds of your robe and withdrew the small pouch you had carried from the temple. Inside were 3 dreams, light as breath, folded into fragments of linen. You laid them gently before her. One smelled of roasted barley and distant thunder. Another shimmered faintly, like a surface half remembered from beneath water. The third was silent, heavy, like grief long kept in shadow. She examined them carefully. These are old, she said. Not yours. No, found along the path. She nodded. Then, with reverence, she placed a single feather upon her scale and unwrapped the first dream. It fluttered into the air, hovering like steam. Too light, she murmured. This one has not yet lived. The second dream was brighter. As it unfurled, images spilled across the platform. A boy chasing bees through date trees. A woman weaving a tapestry that dissolved into wind. A star falling into a bowl of milk. She watched it with a small smile. This one is dreaming itself into others. And then the third. She opened it slowly, and at once the market hushed. The dream did not rise. It sank, low and deep, pooling around the base of the platform like shadow. You felt your chest tighten. It was his dream, the one who had forgotten you first. The god who had locked the sanctuary door, long before names were carved into stars. The dream was sorrow, ancient and rooted. It spoke of regret, not as a passing thought, but as a permanent residence, a home built inside silence. The wearer of dreams looked at you. Her gaze was neither kind nor cruel. It was simply clear. Will you carry it? You nodded. She wrapped it once more and placed it back into your hands. You will not lighten under its weight. I know, you said. She held your gaze a moment longer. Then, softly, there are others here who wish to be remembered. Sit, if you would. You did. For the rest of the morning, you sat beside her on the alabaster platform as people from the village came and went. They brought dreams, some barely formed, some jagged with age. A child brought a drawing made in dust. A man brought the smell of wet reeds and his father's laughter. An old woman brought a silence that had not been broken in years. Each one, the wearer touched and studied. She spoke rarely, but when she did, her voice seemed to echo through time. Some dreams she returned, some she kept, some she asked the dreamer to rewrite. You listened. You held the dreams when asked. You whispered names into them when they seemed to falter. You placed a single coin, one that had not been minted in 1,000 years, into the market bowl. And all the while, above you, the names continued to drift across the sky. One name paused there longer than the others. Your own. You saw it hover just above the palm trees. You read it, not with your eyes, but with something deeper. And for the first time in countless ages, you remembered what it meant. Not God, not forgotten, but something older still. He who carries the dreams of others. And then, with a sigh like a door opening in the heart, your name vanished into light. You stood. The wearer of dreams did not stop you. Where will you go next? She asked. You looked to the distant west, where the Nile curved beyond sight, and the mountains of silence whispered old songs. To the gardens, you said. There is someone waiting for their name to be planted. She smiled. Go gently. And you did. With the pouch of dreams beneath your robe, and the memory of weight in your heart, Thua took to the sky, circling once above the market, and then the road welcomed you back. The path to the garden was not marked on any map. It curved gently westward through meadows of silent reeds and beneath clusters of tamarisk trees that swayed without wind. The air grew cooler here, tinged with the scent of crushed leaves and loamy earth warmed by ancient sunlight. It was the kind of place where time bent slightly, softened at the edges by quiet remembering. You walked slowly, deliberately, with Thua gliding just ahead like a flicker of golden parchment. The dream pouch still rested near your heart, its quiet weight a reminder of why you had come. The garden waited. It was not grand like the temples, nor bustling like the markets. It was small, at least to the eye, and bordered by old stones whose carvings had been worn to whispers. Within those bounds, the world changed. There were no rows of flowers, no decorative paths or fountains. The garden was wild in the gentlest way, poppies unfurling lazily between stalks of grain, fig trees growing side by side with desert lilies, lotus blossoms floating in narrow, winding pools. But what made the garden sacred were the stones, everywhere tucked beneath leaves, half buried near tree roots, balanced on flat earth, were smooth, round stones etched with names, not painted or carved by hand, but written in the subtle lines of veins within the rock itself, names that only revealed themselves to those who remembered how to read them. This was where names came to rest, not because they were lost, but because they had bloomed. You stepped into the garden and immediately felt a soft shift in the air. The dreams you carried seemed to hum faintly in response, like strings being drawn toward a long-lost chord. The gardener appeared without sound. She was older than any river, yet younger than dawn. Her hair was the color of new roots. Her robes were woven from dried lotus petals and morning mist. Around her waist hung a belt of tiny shears and seed pouches, and across her back was slung a curved spade that had never drawn blood. She bowed her head to you as one ancient being to another. You have come with names, she said, not as a question, but a knowing. You bowed in return. I carry 3, 1 heavy, 2 fragile. Let us plant them. She led you to a small clearing where a single fig tree curved protectively over a patch of soil rich with decaying flowers. A carved basin of water sat nearby, its surface still in silver. You knelt and opened the pouch. First, the dream of barley and thunder, a young dream, barely formed, full of longing and hunger. The gardener took it gently and placed it in the earth like a seed, sprinkling it with water from the basin. This one will grow into a path, she said, for someone yet unborn. Next came the dream of starlight and milk, the one that danced between minds like a story retold at different campfires. The gardener smiled. This one is already halfway rooted. It simply needs a place to rest. She cradled it within a cracked clay bowl and placed it beneath the fig tree, where dappled light played across the soil. You watched it dissolve slowly, becoming color, then memory, then light, and finally, the third dream, the heavy one. It sat in your hands like stone. You hesitated before offering it. This one does not want to grow, you said. She took it anyway. This one was never meant to be a tree, the gardener replied, but perhaps it can be a shadow, something that cools the ground when the sun is too strong. She buried it beneath a patch of reeds that shivered without wind. Around them, small black butterflies gathered, silent but watchful. You felt a shift in the dream's weight, not lighter exactly, but more at peace, less alone. The gardener looked up at you. Now you must leave something of yourself. You blinked. I have no dream to offer. She shook her head gently. Not a dream, a name. Your throat felt dry. What if I do not know it yet? Then plant the question. She handed you a small stone, smooth, round, the size of your palm. No marks, just cool silence. You closed your eyes, and into that silence you breathed the question that had carried you all this way. Who was I before I forgot how to dream? The stone grew warm. When you opened your eyes, the faintest curl of gold had appeared across its surface. Not a word, not yet, but the beginning of a line. You placed it at the base of the fig tree, beside the others. Thua fluttered down and landed on your shoulder, head tilted toward the stone. Then she spoke, only once. You were beginning to remember. The gardener stood back. The garden is not a place of endings, only seasons. You nodded, and though your feet were tired, your heart was calm. You remained in the garden for some time after, tracing the names on the old stones, watching how some glowed softly in the fading light, while others pulsed like lullabies. You touched one that felt like laughter, and another that hummed with deep sorrow. Each stone was a story made still. When the sun dipped low and the stars began to peer over the horizon, the gardener brought you a bowl of honeyed water and a handful of tamarind seeds. For your path, she said. You bowed and left with gratitude. As you stepped beyond the boundary of stone and name, the night folded around you like a soft curtain. The air was warm, scented with fig and myrrh. Thua flew silently above, her wings catching stray starlight. Somewhere in the distance, drums echoed faintly, slow, steady, ceremonial, not calling to war or harvest, but to memory. You turned toward them. The path forward was darker now, but you did not fear it. You carried the rhythm of the garden in your bones. You carried your name, half-spoken, still growing. And most of all, you carried dreams. Beyond the garden of names, the path narrowed into a passage of sandstone cliffs and ancient silence. The air thickened with memories, not your own, but borrowed, the kind that hung low like incense in the corners of forgotten rooms. Thua flew low, wings barely brushing the top of the grasses. She was quiet now, more watchful than usual. You followed the rhythm of your footsteps, the weight of your breath. Each step forward felt like a page turning in a very old book. And then you saw it. Rising from the earth like a mirage made solid stood the Temple of Forgotten Echoes. It was not as grand as Karnak or Luxor. It did not boast towering obelisks or golden colonnades. No processions ever came this way. But it was older, so old in fact, that time no longer kept track of it. Built from pale limestone, the structure melted into the hills behind it. Moss crept along the carvings like vines returning home, and at its threshold a hush, not the hush of emptiness, but of listening. You stepped inside. The temperature dropped instantly. Shadows softened. Your footsteps echoed faintly, but not in repetition. They echoed in response. The temple was alive with memory, and it listened. Pillars lined the inner hall, each etched with hieroglyphs faded beyond translation. The scent of dried papyrus and desert rain lingered in the air. Instead of statues, the temple was filled with voices, not audible in the way of speech, but felt along your skin like a breeze that says your name. Thua perched on one of the pillars, tilting her head toward a doorway, half shrouded in black cloth. "This place remembers what even the gods have chosen to forget," she whispered. And you understood. This was not a temple built for worship. It was a repository, a sanctuary for discarded echoes. Memories too painful, names too dangerous, truths too tangled to remain in the open world. You passed beneath the black cloth and entered the inner chamber. It was circular and dim, lit only by a shaft of moonlight falling through a crack in the ceiling. In the center was a low platform on which rested a basin carved from obsidian. Around the walls were dozens of empty niches, as if waiting to be filled with dreams too shy to speak. You stepped closer to the basin. Inside it, you saw no water. You saw yourself, but not as you were now. The reflection shimmered and shifted, sometimes showing you as a child, standing beside a palm tree, sometimes as an elder, with lines etched deep from laughter and grief. Then it showed you as a bird, as flame, as wind scattering through reeds. Thua landed beside the basin and spoke, not aloud, but directly to your thoughts. "This temple holds every dream that was too tender to survive. Yours among them." You reached into the pouch near your chest. Inside was a single fragment, a dream you had not remembered collecting. It was cool and glass-like, almost translucent. As you held it, a soft hum vibrated through your bones, a lullaby in a language you did not speak but understood. Without fully knowing why, you placed the dream into the basin. A soft light flared, and from the basin rose a voice, not in words but in tone, in resonance. It was a child's laugh blended with a mother's prayer. It was the clink of pottery being mended. It was the sound of something once lost saying, "I remember you." You felt tears in your eyes, though you hadn't known you needed to cry. The voice faded, but it left something behind, a shape, a feeling, a presence that settled into the air like the final note of a long-forgotten song. And then, from the niches in the wall, the echoes began to stir. One by one, they whispered to life, not loudly, not urgently, but with the gentleness of breeze through palm fronds. Each echo told a fragment, the dream of a scribe who wrote a name he could never say aloud, the dream of a queen who never ruled but loved a people in silence, the dream of a bird who refused to fly because it feared the sky would forget it, the dream of a god who once dreamed like mortals, then forgot how. Your heart beat louder. That last one, the god who forgot how to dream. That echo was not from a niche. It came from beneath the temple. You knelt, placing your ear to the floor. A pulse, a soft, rhythmic breathing, deep underground, slow and steady, like a dream sleeping beneath stone. Thua hovered beside you. "He sleeps still." You looked up. "Is it him?" She nodded. "He gave up his dreams to protect them, hid them here before forgetting, and now they waited." You stood, eyes scanning the temple. All at once, the architecture made sense. The way the walls curved to cradle echoes, the way the basin drew memory, the way the temple held silence, not as emptiness, but as space to be filled. This was not just a resting place for echoes. It was a womb for dreams yet to return. You felt something shift inside you, not an answer, but a permission, a gentle urging. You stepped to the center of the room and lay down beside the basin, just beneath the moonbeam's gaze. The stone was cool beneath your back, your breathing slowed. Thua settled at your side, and together you let yourself remember. You remembered the gardens and the pyramids, the forgotten gods and the nameless children, the stars above Nubia and the songs hummed by grandmothers into the cradle of night. And most of all, you remembered how it felt to believe in the dream again. You did not speak, you slept, and the temple dreamed with you. When you awoke, the stone beneath your back was warm, as though the temple itself had drawn breath through the night. Thua stirred beside you, feathers rustling like dry reeds in a breeze. Outside, dawn had not yet broken, but the sky was beginning to shift, its darkness softening, turning from charcoal to deep violet. You sat up slowly. The temple of forgotten echoes felt different now, not heavier or lighter, but fuller. The air held a soft vibration, like a harp string plucked beneath the floor of the world. Somewhere within the walls, dreams stirred again. As you stepped out into the cool pre-dawn air, a new path had revealed itself. It led down, a carved stairway winding between cliffs and through a veil of acacia trees toward a distant glimmer, a shimmer that flickered like starlight on water. Thua flew ahead, silent but sure. You followed, your feet guided less by sight than by an ancient instinct, something in your bones remembering a rhythm older than maps. After a long descent, you reached it, a river, but not just any river. This one flowed like liquid night, the surface flecked with stars that shimmered and spun as they drifted downstream. It was as if the Milky Way had spilled from the sky and chosen to meander through the desert's roots. This was the river of returning stars. No boat waited, no ferryman called your name, and yet you knew you were meant to cross. The river did not rush or roar, it hummed, a lullaby in cosmic tempo. Its banks were lined with reed lanterns that pulsed faintly, glowing with the rhythm of sleepers' breaths. You looked to Thua, she simply nodded. You stepped into the shallows. The water was not cold, it was impossibly soft, like floating silk or a memory long forgotten. It carried you, not forward or backward, but inward. As the current took you, stars swirled around your legs. Some blinked like distant cities seen from the back of a great sky serpent. Others pulsed like heartbeats, steady, slow, eternal. And then the river began to whisper. Each ripple held a voice, and each voice held a dream returning to the world. One murmured of a man who painted the gods on tomb walls and believed each stroke kept a soul from forgetting itself. Another told of a weaver whose patterns were copied by stars overhead. Another still, fainter, more sorrowful, recalled a child who once dreamed so vividly that his visions drew jackals to his window, mistaking him for a god. As you drifted, you saw them, the dreams. They rose like fish made of starlight, swimming just below the surface. Some darted past you, playful and bright. Others swam deeper, slower, heavy with stories too ancient to rise quickly. Then one came close. It circled you, and suddenly you knew it. This was your dream, the one you had forgotten when you entered this journey, the one you'd lost before your first memory of this world. It shimmered, pale gold with hints of green and blue, like sunrise through papyrus leaves. It pulsed once, then dove deep into your chest, like a stone falling into still water. You gasped, but the sound never reached your ears. Instead, it echoed through your whole body, a warmth blooming outward from your ribs, filling every hollow corner with a soft glow. You remembered it now, a dream of standing beside a sleeping god, hand in hand, both of you watching stars fall into a river like petals, a promise made without words. When you forget, I will remember for us both. The current began to slow. Ahead, the river widened, opening into a great basin, a calm lake where the stars gathered and rested, like fireflies on a sleeping drum. On the shore stood a figure, tall, cloaked in twilight, not a god, not quite human, something in between. He wore robes woven from strands of night. His eyes were closed, but even so, you felt them see you. He stepped forward and spoke. You carry the dream. You opened your mouth to answer, but your voice emerged not as sound, but as light, spilling from your throat in soft tendrils that wove around you both. The figure reached out and touched the light and smiled. I remember. A pause. You are ready. He turned and gestured to the water behind him. There, rising from the lake, was an island, small and round, like a lily pad in cosmic bloom. On it stood a low structure, half temple, half shelter, surrounded by reeds made of glass. This, he said, is the place where dreamers return. You stepped from the river, the water parting like silk around your legs. As your feet touched the shore, you felt a weight lift, not just from your body, but from your name, your story, your entire lineage. You were now a bearer of the dream, and the one who would awaken the forgotten god. Thua landed softly beside you. Are you afraid? She asked. You looked to the sky, so vast, so velvet, and then to the river, which now began to fade behind you, not as though it disappeared, but as though you had carried it inside you. No, you whispered, I am ready. You walked toward the island. The god waited within, and soon the final part of your journey would begin. The wind on the island was like breath, slow, warm, and laced with the scent of old papyrus and crushed lotus. As you approached the temple in the center of the star-flecked lake, you noticed it had no doors, no walls, only 4 pale stone columns held up a roof of woven reeds that glimmered like polished bronze in the starlight. In its center, on a low platform of obsidian and ivory, he slept, the god. He was smaller than you expected, no larger than a child, and yet curled in sleep like a universe folded in upon itself. His skin shimmered like moonlit silt. His hair flowed around him, not in strands, but in drifting hieroglyphs, glowing softly with forgotten stories. He did not stir at your presence. Thua, ever silent, landed at the edge of the platform, head bowed. You stepped forward, each footfall hushed by the soft sand beneath, and with each step you remembered more, not facts or faces, but feelings, as though your very selves were waking alongside this ancient being. You knelt before him, and then you offered the dream. It rose from your chest, that same pale gold shimmer, tinged with sunrise blue. It hovered above your hands like an offering bowl filled with stars. The god's chest rose slowly, then stilled. Nothing happened. The silence was deep and undisturbed. You looked to Thua. Why does he not wake? You asked. She tilted her head gently. Because you must not give him the dream, she said softly. You must share it. You blinked. How? By remembering it aloud. You looked down at the sleeping god again, his brow smooth, his expression one of peace, tinged with sorrow, like someone caught in a memory of something half lost. And so you began to speak. Quietly, reverently, you told him the dream, not just the vision in the river, but the journey, each temple, each voice, each silence that echoed louder than thunder. You spoke of your arrival, of the library where scrolls forgot their ink, of the wind that carried names no one spoke anymore, of Thua and the gate of unborn moons, of the river of stars and the promise you had remembered. With each word, the god shifted slightly, a finger twitching, an eyelid fluttering, a breath deepening. You told him of the moment the stars danced around you, and you recognized yourself in the dream, not as a visitor, not even as a servant, but as a keeper, a weaver of forgotten sleep. The god stirred. His eyes opened slowly, not both at once. One eye remained shut, still dreaming, the other opened like dawn behind mist. It was not white or blue or gold, it was story. Within that eye you saw galaxies made of ink and voice, pyramids made of memory, laughter caught in jars and buried in sand for 10,000 years. He saw you, and he knew you. A slow, radiant smile spread across his lips. His voice, when it came, was not heard in the ears, but in the marrow. You remembered, he whispered. I tried, you said. We tried. His eye closed again, but this time not in sleep, in peace. He sat up slowly, hair spilling like script across the stone. The hieroglyphs around him began to swirl upward, dancing, reforming into birds, wind, stars, and songs. I dreamed of a world where no one dreamed, he said softly, where the sand whispered, but no one listened. You bowed your head. But now, he said, I remember who I am, because you remembered who you were. He rose to his feet, and all around you, the island shimmered, the reeds turned to glass, the lake rippled with laughter, the stars overhead rearranged themselves into ancient constellations, unseen for millennia. The river of returning stars flowed upward, reversing, spiraling into the heavens like a cosmic staircase. You have done what even gods forget to do, he said. You listened to the silence. He reached out and touched your forehead. Your eyes closed, and you saw yourself as a child, building dream towers from sunbeams. Your ancestors weaving stories into shawls to keep nightmares at bay. The god before you, newly born from dusk, learning how to dream by watching mortals sleep. You opened your eyes, and he was smiling. A soft rumble spread through the island, not of destruction, but of reawakening. Beneath the earth, dream roots unfurled. In far-off villages, people stirred with dreams they hadn't had in years. The god turned to Thua. Will you return with her? He asked. Thua bowed deeply. Until the stars forget their names, I will walk beside the dreamer. He nodded. Then to you, he said, there is one more place to go. He stepped toward the edge of the island, where a small wooden skiff now floated. Its sail was made of old lullabies, the mast carved from the wood of a tree that had once grown in a dream. He gestured. Come. You stepped into the boat. As it drifted from the island, the god remained behind, watching, not as a ruler, but as a companion who had been found again. The last thing you saw as the mist closed around the boat was his smile, and in that smile, peace. You leaned back against the hull as the stars above dimmed, and at last your eyelids grew heavy, not with weariness, but with completion. The dream had returned, the god had awakened, and you had become the story. The world you returned to was not quite the same. It wore the same face, the same clouds drifting through the same ancient sky, but beneath the surface, something had shifted, softly, subtly, like a thread pulled through fabric, tightening a weave long since loosened. You stepped off the boat and onto a narrow, sandy path. There was no grand arrival, no crowd waiting, no trumpet of gods announcing your return, only the dawn, and it was the most beautiful dawn you had ever seen. The sky was the color of warm papyrus, and the sun bled gold from the edges of the earth, as though someone had unstoppered a bottle of light. Birds, not ordinary birds, but ones you had seen in the dream, with wings of ink and feathers like quills, flew overhead, sketching arcs in the sky. Behind you, the river had vanished, the boat too. Only your footprints remained, fading already beneath a breeze full of jasmine and memory. You walked, with no destination, no temple, no library awaiting. But the journey was not over. As you passed through the edge of a sleepy village, old women sweeping their thresholds paused and watched you. One raised a hand to her heart in a gesture you somehow understood, the sign of the dreamkeeper. You returned the gesture, surprised by how natural it felt. At the marketplace, vendors were just setting up. The smell of bread and roasted nuts mingled with the faintest trace of lotus oil. A little boy carrying dates glanced up from his basket. His eyes widened, and he whispered, "She has dream skin." You touched your cheek, not understanding, but when you looked in the surface of a water jar, you saw it, a faint shimmer just beneath your skin, like sunlight reflecting on still water. It was not a glow that others would notice in passing, but those who had forgotten their dreams would see it and remember. You were no longer just someone who had a dream. You were now someone who carried it. The dream keeper. The god who forgot how to dream was not gone. He had not faded into starlight or returned to some lofty throne. He had become something else, part of the world, part of every quiet hour when someone closed their eyes and wandered into imagination without fear. You felt him when a child laughed in her sleep. You heard him in the rhythm of the potter's wheel, in the hum of a lullaby sung by a mother while sweeping sand from her doorstep. His voice echoed now not in words, but in all the spaces where silence held meaning. As you walked, you realized the temples you visited were not places made of stone, but people. The new library was not in a crumbling city, but in the hearts of those who remembered how to listen, to birds, to water, to dreams not yet dreamt. You sat beneath a tree at midday. The sun filtered through its wide leaves, dappling the earth like a broken mosaic. There was no urgency, no task undone, just breath, just presence. Thua had vanished that morning with the boat. She had left no farewell, but you understood. She was needed where the mist still clung, where other wanderers waited at the gates of lost stories. You did not grieve her absence. You carried her song in your heart like a lantern. A young man passed on the road nearby, leading a donkey laden with scrolls. He stopped when he saw you. "You've come from the other river," he said softly. You nodded. "I've dreamt of it," he added, "since I was small." You motioned for him to sit. He did, and you told him a story, not the whole journey, not all at once, but one piece, a fragment, something gentle enough to settle behind the eyes like sand behind the eyelids before sleep. When you finished, he looked at you with tears not of sadness, but of recognition. "I remember now," he said. He stood and offered you a scroll from his pack. "You should have this." It was blank, but you accepted it with gratitude, knowing full well that it would not remain so. That night, you reached the edge of a small oasis. The water mirrored the stars again, as it had that first night in the field of forgotten names. You spread out a woven mat and lay down beneath the constellations, and for the first time in what felt like lifetimes, you slept and you dreamed. But it was no longer a dream of mystery or longing or forgetting. It was a dream of sharing. You walked through the dream world, not as a visitor, but as a guide. Doors opened where you stepped. Wind sang your name in dozens of ancient tongues. The stars gathered again, but this time they were watching you, waiting for your voice, and you gave it. You spoke stories into the dream. You told of the god who forgot, and the dreamer who reminded, of the temples lost, and the paths found again, of Thua's feather, and the scrolls that caught rain. You dreamed not for yourself, but for all those who could no longer dream. And when you awoke, the world had changed. Not dramatically, just enough. Children were remembering their bedtime stories more vividly. Elders found old songs on their tongues. A merchant swore she saw her late husband smile at her from a puddle's reflection. And no one understood why, but you did. You continued your journey, from village to village, oasis to oasis, telling stories in the shade, listening to others in return, and always the faint shimmer beneath your skin remained, until one day, as the sky turned indigo and the horizon burned with twilight, you came upon a quiet house carved into a cliffside. A woman was waiting there. She looked like no one you'd ever met, and yet she reminded you of everyone. She beckoned, and inside there was a bed, a lamp, a cool jar of water, and a scroll waiting with your name on it. No longer blank, it was filled with the story, your story. You lay down on the bed, eyes growing heavy. Outside, the wind carried sand and stardust in equal measure. You closed your eyes, and for the first time since the god had awakened, you did not dream for others, you simply dreamed for yourself. Of rivers and feathers, of golden pyramids and sleeping gods, of boats made from lullabies, and of people who, like you, walked between stories. And somewhere, in a starlit corner of the dream realm, the god smiled, because now you both remembered, and tomorrow you would begin the story again with someone new.